and welcome to the Sports Doyen. This is Kushagra, and today we have the utmost pleasure of hosting the greatest cricket writer in the world. Today, a cricketer, might I add, from the South Yarras in Melbourne, and the author of masterpieces such as, from the Times of Victor Trumper and many, many, many more publications beyond. This is Mr. Gideon Haigh. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We cannot express as the channel how grateful we are for you to have you on the channel. Your writing is something that is read widely all across the cricketing world. Your name is synonymous, even in many a cricketing homes here in India and all across. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope you're doing well in these challenging times and keeping safe.
Well, I'm playing cricket, which is great, which is a very important part of my emotional well-being. I made runs at the weekend. That's always great. That feels fantastic. I've had a very good summer, a better summer than probably I expected. There were points last year, because I'm in Melbourne, where we were 6 months in lockdown, where cricket seemed a long way off, but it's probably turned out a good deal better than we expected. I'm slightly surprised to find that I'm meant to be a household name in India, when I've always thought of myself as having a nice, simple, low profile, where I just produce words and stand behind them. But I'm not a social media person, not a broadcast person. I'm a wordsmith in a very kind of old-fashioned way, and I don't really aspire to doing anything else, quite frankly, except for getting runs next weekend.
Absolutely, and I guess it's the power of your words. I would put it in that manner, because believe me, people do know you. People do follow you quite regularly here in India, and I guess this is something India and Australia share quite deeply. Their love for cricket and the hunger to know more about the game, different perspectives of the game. So I think that's something we find quite interesting, and actually, honestly, quite intriguing, with the way you are actually able to weave stories, and you're actually able to gather in the emotion into the writing that you have. And actually, talking about that, I'll actually start about the question that I was about to start with. I'm going to talk to you a little about your writing, because we've seen in your writing an innate ability to weave through stories, as I mentioned, and bring together the emotion with respect to the game. How do you go about the process of actually selecting a story while you're at it, while you during the selection process, and also adding the cricketing emotions through it? Because that is something that me personally, as the researcher, when I was looking through your work, that is something that's a beautiful ability to have, to make the reader actually lost in his or her own world, dreaming of cricket and trying to sell the dream sort of in a manner.
Well, I mean, one important thing about me as a journalist is that I don't only write about cricket. My background is actually as a business journalist. I've written about all sorts of things. I've written books about banking, abortion, asbestos. I've written a history of the office. I've written true crime. I've been a journalist for 37 years. I've never confined myself or defined myself by my cricket journalism. One of the reasons why I think I've been able to write about cricket for a long time is that I've never been solely dependent on it for a living, and B, kind of intellectual sustenance. I like to go away from cricket for a while and come back to it, because it should always be a pleasure to write about. It should never be a burden. It should never feel all that much like a job. I've never wanted to be financially dependent on it, because I've always wanted the opportunity to be able to quit it tomorrow if I had to. If I've got any value at all, it's that I don't speak anyone else's part. I'm an independent journalist. I call it as I see it. I don't feel as though I have to speak for anyone but myself. That's tremendously freeing. I never look over my shoulder wondering whether I'm going to offend someone. It all comes pretty straightforwardly. Sometimes I'm wrong. Often in this game, you're wrong. Because a lot of your work is about the unknown and the unknowable. But frankly, that's good, because if you were right all the time, it'd be bloody boring, wouldn't it? And there'd be no
Yeah.
point in turning up. So just occasionally, it's just fantastic to be part of a game where it defies your predictions, it defies your analysis, it defies common sense. I mean, in some ways, the Australia-India series that we've just been through was so intoxicating and so thrilling because it defied a lot of those things that we thought that we knew about the game. That if a team gets bowled out for 36 in a test match, then kind of game over. You know, they'll never come back from there. If a team loses 3 or 4 key players at key moments of the series, really, these days it's so difficult to replace a player halfway through a series with so little opportunity to get a player match fit. Really, that's a huge potential disadvantage. If you lose a huge personality like Kohli at a crucial moment in a series, very, very difficult to replace. And yet India did all that. India did all that and more. And that's why I think I'm not alone among Australians in thinking that was just a great test series. And that's what we turn up for. I don't really turn up to see Australia win or England win or anyone win. I want to see a good series. And this series just went absolutely down to the very last hour of the very last session with all of the possibilities in mind. And turned on a dime at stages on that last day. But you did have that overarching sense that you were watching something special and that you couldn't look away. And you end up a series like that and thinking, wow, I really do have the best job in the world that I get to write about this, and that I could try to come up with a form of words that describes it. So I guess in answer to your question, the thing is, don't rely on cricket alone. I think that's important. I think that means that your frame of reference is big. You can pull in all sorts of kind of cultural comparisons. You can think about the game's significance in its wider sense. And if you're coming and going, then you should never be jaded. You should always be fresh. You should always be looking on cricket as though it was the first time that you were doing it. And I guess the third thing is, I play cricket. I don't know whether you play cricket. I love playing cricket. I've played cricket for a club since I was 9. It's still the most exciting part of my week is playing my weekly game. That I think I'm always being reminded of how difficult it is to do well, how fine is the line between success and failure, how exciting it is to be part of a successful team, how disappointing it is to be on the wrong side of a match, how hope often triumphs over experience, how often the most random things happen in a game of cricket. And it doesn't matter what level of the game you're playing at. That is true, whether it's Test cricket or whether it's D-grade Mercantile Cricket Association, which is what I play in.
I mean, that's essentially the whole joy of playing the sport, isn't it? I mean, even if you take it away from the club cricket, I think what's very popular here in India is just a bunch of friends gathering and playing next to the society you're living at, or just trying to book a turf and playing 5-on-5, maybe playing a 7-on-7. That's something we really look forward to. And as you mentioned, it often is the highlight of a week. And I do play cricket, of course, not in the last year or so. It's been quite limited in that sense because we've not had that opportunity to go out and mingle as such. But prior to that, we were quite regular. We try to get in a couple of days of cricket in a week, if not more. And that's something it gets the juices flowing, gets the competitive element within amongst us also. So I think that's fast. Really, really nice to know that you're still so much in touch with the game, and that actually probably keeps your love for the game going. Talking about as a young professional, you did mention that your base in journalism is quite broad, and I guess as you mentioned, the frame of references that you talk about, that must truly help when it comes to actually trying to put your thoughts onto the paper in that sense. So while growing up, who were your biggest influences, and amongst contemporary writers or broadcasters that you might have seen, anyone that you really admire from across the world?
Growing up, I mean, look, I read Cardus when I was young, and I liked Cardus a lot. I think what was interesting about reading Cardus when young was that you had a sense that cricket writing had been going on for a long time. Even if it wasn't a particular style of journalism that you aspired to, the fact that he had seen cricket at the turn of the century, that he'd seen Victor Trumpet, that he'd seen Jack Hobbs, that he could explain what it was like to watch Ted McDonald or Wilfred Rhodes. He brought those names to life. Even though his frame of reference and his frame of reference, because he was also a music writer, it encouraged you to think that it was possible to write about cricket and to write about other things as well. I think an English writer that I liked very much when I was growing up, and still do, is Alan Ross, who was the Observer cricket writer in the 1950s and 60s. He wrote a string of really, really fine books, tour books, a genre that's now almost fallen by the board because tours are so short and truncated. But he sort of introduced me to the idea of what you could learn about a country by watching the way in which it related to cricket. It's a shame that Ross never went to India, because I think he would have found it an enormously stimulating environment. But he wrote very well about the West Indies. He wrote brilliantly about South Africa, and he wrote 2 classic tour books about Australia. And to see Australia through the eyes of an erudite, an articulate Englishman, was to get a kind of an introduction to the idea of being an outsider on your own culture, to observe the things that we take for granted, and to think about how you might explain them to a stranger. So I've always tried to be slightly outside my own culture and to be looking in on it and trying to interpret it in a new and constructive way. As far as contemporary writers are concerned, well, I mean, Mike Atherton is a good friend of mine. We've been friends for quite a long time now. I always stay with him when I'm in England. He would be the first person I read for an analysis of a day's play. He has the huge advantage of being a professional cricketer. He's a very good advertisement for the professional cricketer turned professional writer. Not everyone makes that transition as seamlessly as Mike, and I think the reason is that he was a very humble man when he came into the press box, who was determined to learn how to do it better and to educating himself in his craft in the same ways in which he'd approach batting. So he didn't take it for granted that he was a walk-up start by any means. I think as a writer, he's just getting better and better. And another friend of mine for a long time is Ramchandra Guha, who's probably the premier cricket historian in India, one of the leading public intellectuals. He was one of my early ports of call in being introduced to Indian cricket literature, of which I now have quite a large collection. Once again, he had a different perspective, but a perspective that I could identify with immediately. Because the great thing about Ram when he writes about cricket is that he's capable of doing the big picture. He's capable of giving you the whole geopolitical and economic and social context of the game. But he's also capable of writing beautifully about the art of a left arm spinner, or the art of an opening batsman, or the pang that a fan feels for watching Gundar Vishwanath or Bhagwat Chandrasekhar. When Ram writes about cricket, he's not slumming it. He really, really loves the game, and his appreciation and understanding of it is very, very deep.
Absolutely, and just adding on to that, I was fortunate enough to actually, for a semester during my grad school, to have him as one of the guest lecturers. Right. He's talking about he's taking a course on the history of cricket. It was those couple of months when we used to have those interactions with him. You were quite spot on in putting it there. He's able to take the bigger picture, and in an hour's lecture, he's able to break it down so beautifully and so effectively that he's able to take the entire class forward with him. Whether you're interested in cricket or not, the parlance becomes so beautiful. It becomes so magnificently told that you can't help but be hooked onto his words, whatever he's saying. So it's fantastic writers to talk about. And of course, Michael Atherton is universally praised. Especially for his writing, on the current ongoing India versus England Test series as well. Yes, he's quite appreciated there. as compared to some other English captains who weren't quite popular with the Indian masses. Might I add? I think we'll probably get to that itself. The debate on the pitch with respect to the type of pitches that were provided for the India versus England Test series in particular. Uh, we saw that the pitch discussion dominated the thoughts and minds of whether it's an analyst, whether it's a broadcaster, whether it's a journalist writing. At least we saw a lot of that here in the Indian media. You used to have a page's worth of articles on the match, and then a page and a half worth of articles on the type of soil, on the gradient of soil, on the curator, on the history of the weather conditions in the city, and blah blah blah. So, how did you see that in the recently concluded series, and what did you make of the quality of cricket on show? Because I think somewhere in the middle, somehow I felt like, not enough was spoken about the quality of the cricket played amongst the two sides. Because in the end, now with the ICC coming out with the ratings for the pitches, they only rated, I think, one pitch was rated as not satisfactory, or so rather average. Other pitches who have been rated as decent or good, like the first Test match pitch was rated as good. So how did you make? What did you make of the pitches, and more importantly, the quality of cricket on show?
Well, one point I'd like to make about pitches is that they add enormously to the game's interest, don't they? I mean, you don't get this in a lot of other sports where you get a page and a half written about soil. I mean, what a wonderful game when that becomes a subject of kind of abstruse sort of academic debate. That's endlessly fascinating. I happen to like that kind of cricket. I like spinners bowling from both ends on a pitch that's giving them something, where you're getting a lot of balls per hour. There's a lot of action taking place in a contained space, and where every scoring opportunity has to be taken because runs are at an absolute premium. Something that Mike and I have always agreed on is that the game is always better when the ball is slightly in the ascendancy. There is nothing more boring than watching Test cricket in Australia on the flat pitches that we have rolled out over the last 10 years, where you win the toss and one side, usually Australia, makes 500. I find that cricket a real turn-off. They are bad pitches. They are really bad pitches. They make for incredibly monotonous cricket. Quite possibly the worst pitch I've ever seen a Test match take place on in Australia was the Boxing Day Test match of 2017, where Alistair Cook, who I love dearly, a terrific cricketer, but batted for like 3 days and just almost couldn't get him out. And there was absolutely no hope of a result. It was an absolutely pointless game. That game is probably still happening somewhere in the world. Some part of the multiverse. That game is still, and Alistair Cook is still in. He's still squaring the ball off the hip. I don't like cricket like that. And I found this series incredibly stimulating. I don't want to see too many 2-day Test matches, but every now and again, I don't mind seeing a 2-dayer. Actually, we just saw another 2-dayer between Afghanistan and Zimbabwe. That was a really interesting game. We shouldn't be obsessed with kind of safety. We shouldn't be obsessed with uniformity. Cricket is a game that has all sorts of varieties, and we should have the opportunity to explore them. And I think the other thing about watching this kind of cricket in the modern era is because television coverage is so good now. You can really follow absolutely everything that's happening. You could really watch the ball coming out of Ashwin's hand, the ball coming out of, you could watch the trajectory that Axar Patel was following. You could study exactly where the ball was landing, all the differing degrees of deviation. That is such a luxury. That is a luxury that I didn't have growing up, that I didn't have till really 5 or 10 years ago. So imagine watching what watching Shane Warne would be like with that kind of apparatus to study him. I mean, it was pretty good when he was playing, but television coverage has improved enormously since then. So I think we should sort of celebrate that kind of cricket more often. Of course, I'm not a partisan here. I didn't have a dog in the fight. It didn't matter to me who won. But I found that cricket very hard to look away from. And I felt that in the end, the better team won. What's there not to be happy about?
I mean, this is fair enough. I think you'll make even more fans after this interview amongst the Indian public. But I think this is fair enough, isn't it? As you put it quite well there, cricket is perhaps the only sport in the world wherein certain conditions and certain weather conditions and of course the conditions of play do change from geography to geography. Perhaps tennis is the only sport that maybe perhaps comes close in that sense, where you have different surfaces on which the players play, and certain surfaces give advantage to a different type of player, and while certain surfaces are actually better for others. But coming back to cricket, this is a question that this question I felt very personally about, because growing up, we were always told about the pitches in Perth, especially at the Wacker, being the fastest pitch in the world. And I quite fondly remember the 2008 Test match. After that series, which was marred by a lot of umpiring decisions. But coming back to that, I think I felt it was a very famous victory for India there. But in general, the whole excitement of going to Australia was because you knew historically Melbourne played a certain way, Sydney played a certain way, Perth played a certain way, Brisbane perhaps still plays a certain way, as probably it used to, or probably has gotten quicker. We haven't had the pleasure of going to Hobart very often, so can't exactly tell you how this is going there. But no, just your opinion on the drop-in pitches. While I know it does help in terms of the multi-sport aspect of the stadium, multi-facility utilization of the stadium to make it more economically viable. But has it not taken away from the game in Australia? Because I know we're all sorry for using this word, we're all suckers for tradition in cricket, aren't we? And the moment you try to alter that, there is going to be a man, there is going to be a person standing and shouting, "Hey, this is how you did it 100 years back. Why is it different now?" But in this manner, do you think it's a bit justified for the audience to maybe feel slightly aggrieved that the whole beauty of Test cricket? I think the challenge of going from Perth to Brisbane to Adelaide to Sydney to Melbourne, perhaps with the drop-in pitches, it becomes slightly more uniform, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes, it does. I think that's been a problem that Australian cricket's probably had for the last 10 years. I think the drop-in pitches are improving, but certainly the first generation of drop-ins were very mundane and very uniform, and basically designed to give you 5 days cricket to maximise the opportunities for broadcasters. I think they've taken more chances with them over the last few years, and that's been to the good. I think the pitch at Perth Stadium is fast, and towards the end, the Wacker was really trading on its reputation rather than the reality. Actually, it's a bit dicey batting in Perth these days. When India played last year in 2018, it was a terrific Test match. India, if you remember, went in with 4 fast bowlers, and then there was that weird phenomenon where it actually played pretty evenly in the first session and got livelier towards the end of the day. I love that. That's like getting to know a character, because a pitch should be a separate character in the drama, and its behaviour should be unpredictable. And I think that the Brisbane pitch ended up being a fascinating one. Early on, the players were saying it's drier than a normal Brisbane pitch. The cracks are emerging. It's likely to break up. And then it didn't break up, and then it held together. And actually, it was a very good batting wicket on the last day. So even the players who are absolutely far more expert on this subject than I am as a layperson, were confounded by it. I think maybe the Australians played the pitch and the Indians played the game, and in the end, it was the game that mattered in Brisbane.
Absolutely, and I guess you could say a little bit the same for the English as well here in India, because we often felt when the English batters were coming out, they probably lost already in their heads. And, I think in the shed itself, they accepted that they'll not be able to play the ball. So one would hope that we can move past that, because that for me, that's the beauty of cricket, isn't it? I mean, when you go to England, you'd expect the ball to jag around, seam around here, there, and everywhere. And similarly, when you come to India, probably expect to play spin. The puff of dust shouldn't really scare people. I think Sir Vivian Richards mentioned about this during the series. He said, "Why don't the batsmen use their feet and step out and try to smother the spin?"
Mm.
I know, talking from the vantage point of Sir Viv, it's very different.
Yeah, yeah.
He's been blessed with the talent I don't think many humans ever have. So, but yes, for sure that's an approach that can be found. Talking about cricket in today's world, it's a rapidly growing sport. I know we know ICC is trying its best to get in as many associate nations, if not member nations, for that matter. T20 is becoming a fastly popular format all across the world. We've seen the United States Cricket Association talking about trying to become a permanent member by 2030, which would be incredible to think of that transformation within 9 years. We've seen Afghanistan recently, as you mentioned, that registered the third Test victory in just overall 6 matches that they've played, which is a fantastic achievement considering where they've come from. But then we also see that primarily the format that's been exported around the world is the T20 format. We did talk about this earlier. Cricket is probably the only sport in the world which has three well-defined formats of actually playing the sport. And I think you will be hard pressed to find another sport that allows for such level of flexibility. So with the advent of T20 cricket, now the globalization of T20 cricket as well, where do you see, and this is not a doom and gloom question, this is in terms of change of approach in Test cricket, because we often talk about the doom and gloom. We've seen new players coming in, like the likes of Mohammad Rizwan, Rishabh Pant, Marnus Labuschagne, Kyle Myers for the West Indies as well. We've seen a change in approach towards batting and probably assessing situations in Test cricket. Do you see this as a cultural shift in that particular sense in Test cricket, as we probably saw from the 50s to the 60s when scoring rates improved?
Well, of course, the other thing that's changed enormously is the technology to do with batsmanship. I mean, it's just phenomenal how powerful bats are compared to the bats that I grew up with. I've got a rack of bats upstairs. I've never discarded a bat in my ignominious club career, but it is amazing to see how much better they've got. How much further you can. I hit a six at the weekend. That just hardly ever happens. So if I can hit a six, then there really is something wrong with the game. Of course, players are much physically stronger than they used to be. They're full-time professionals. They have much more opportunity to hone their physiques in the gym. They're much more confident about their capacity to go over the boundary and to achieve elevation. That was something that, as a young player, you were taught never to do. So attitudes to that kind of risk have changed completely, and it is inevitable that those risk factors or those risk dynamics will get taken into other formats of the game. We were interviewing David Warner last week, and I asked him whether he had, at any stage in his career, found himself thinking T20 in a test match situation. And he said, "Oh yes, that's definitely happened. I've been in situations where I just haven't been able to stop playing strokes," and that's why he has stepped back from playing in the Big Bash League in Australia, because he just simply doesn't want to be going back and forth in short order over the course of an Australian season. He will set aside an IPL and get himself ready for that. And at the end of that, he will come off and he will decompress and he will go back to other formats of the game. I think what probably is going to come under pressure, I mean, I can see strong justifications for all the different international formats. I think what is going to become under pressure in the next few years is domestic four-day cricket, which is actually the fourth format of the game that we never talk about, that we actually played probably more of than anything else. And it doesn't make money, even though we understand it to be an important part of a player's maturation, and we still subsidise it to a degree. When economic factors are so fundamental to all kind of strategic decision making, I suspect that we'll find our domestic four-day seasons under increasing pressure, because there's incredible competition for real estate in the cricket calendar, isn't it? We're squeezing in 15 months of cricket now into every 12 months. Something's got to give, and I suspect, unfortunately, that's going to be it. And we won't recognise what we're losing at that as we do so, we'll think, oh well, guys will make adjustments. Guys will work it out, and before long, there will be flow-on effects from that. I think people often think T20 is great, ODI cricket's great, Test cricket is great. They're all really great. We don't recognise the impacts on one another of their kind of overlap and their competition, and also their competition for the same talent pool. They're actually, the number of cricketers who are available for recruitment, particularly in Australia, which is a pretty small country with a it's not a fast growing cricket population. All cricket's formats are fishing in the same pond here, and if a Josh Philippe, for instance, decides that he wants to specialise in T20, then he is a loss to first-class cricket and Test cricket and to the other forms of the game, and to the already considerable investment in his development that the game has made.
Absolutely, and talking about, I don't know if we'd really call it a sacrifice of the Ranji Trophy, but the domestic 4-day competition here in India, we did not have that at all this season. We've had the T20 equivalent of it, which is the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy, and we've had the Vijay Hazare Trophy recently, which Mumbai won, the 50-over format. But we've not had the Ranji Trophy, which is, of course, the domestic 4-day competition. And while I agree with the fact, with the board's approach that this is more of a white ball based year, right? With the T20 World Cup coming in, the T20 World Cup again being there next year as well. So the focus has for sure shifted. But you're right. Yeah, it's actually quite honestly, that's some food for thought for us as well. I don't think we as well have even recognized or appreciated the fact that the 4-day format in itself is a different format of cricket, and we don't probably consider it as the fourth format in cricket. We probably tend to club it along with Test cricket, or like preparatory cricket for Test cricket. In terms of it being economically viable, I feel this is an investment that cricket in itself will have to continue to keep making if it wants to keep trying to get the cream to rise up to the top in the manner, because you're absolutely spot on there. It's the best way for a player to mature, that kind of cricket. So yeah, I mean, one would hope that we can find ways to make it more popular amongst the local audiences. Coming back to Australia, not exactly talking about the series in that sense, but that final day at the SCG, Tim Payne caught a fair bit of flack, for his approach, whether it was with Ravichandran Ashwin or it was in general, because it seemed like he probably did hamper his own concentration with the drop chance there. But it brought the whole discussion and the debate around the cultural shift that was undertaken by Cricket Australia, particularly, and might I add, quite admirably, because it's probably one of the very few times we've seen a national board actually take cognizance of the fact that they wanted to change something and go so far out of the way to do it. To an extent, a lot of the cricketing world felt the punishments on the 3 perpetrators were slightly longer than they should have been, and we see a couple of overarching effects of that still. But what has been your view of this change in Australian cricket in the last 3, maybe 4 years, and also just your opinion on the future of Tim Payne as the Australian Test skipper, because there were a few questions raised on his ability to lead the side as well. Him probably having lost the confidence of the seniors. I know, once the team is in a bit of a bad shape, all sorts of rumors do come out, whether they're true or not. But just your opinions on him.
Well, I think Tim, for a guy who got the job under the circumstances that he did, which are unprecedented in Australian cricket, to replace a sacked captain halfway through a series. I think it's only ever happened once before. That was Ian Chappell coming in for Bill Laurie in 1970-71, and the unique circumstances of a kind of a moral meltdown in Australian cricket. An awful lot was expected of him, a guy who had really only just come back into Test calculations in 2017-18 after a long period where even he thought that his international chances had gone by the board. I think he's done a fantastic job, all things considered. there's only a limited amount that a captain can actually do, but he has regained the public's confidence. He speaks well. His own game has, in general, sort of withstood pressure. He's still playing good cricket. He's playing better cricket in his 30s than he was in his 20s. So, and that's hard to do. And of course, we'd never had a keeper captain before, not since, I don't know, Jack Blackham, on a regular basis. So that was a completely unexplored area. Could a keeper actually captain the side? We're now asking similar questions about whether a bowler could captain the side as people advance Pat Cummins's credentials as a potential successor to Tim. So all things considered, I think that Tim's been a credit to that job. I think that the circumstances of this season for both teams are pretty difficult to generalise from. The long periods that teams spent in the bubble, in their own company, cut off from family and friends and community. I mean, historically, it's a huge advantage, of course, for Australia to play cricket in Australia, but it didn't really feel like they were in Australia last week. It felt like they were in a hotel, a constant hotel that followed them around wherever they were going. And I wasn't surprised that at times the Australian players and the Indian players found that a considerable strain. I think it's a great credit to them that there weren't more incidents in the course of the series, that it was played in as good a spirits as it was. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to get players out on the last day of a test match that you felt as though you've had the winning of from sort of round about halfway through. So I think Tim did allow the situation to get the best of him on that last day. I felt that even though he immediately kind of accepted responsibility for his failures on that last day, I think he fell short in his response. I felt he should have made a personal apology to Ashwin. I thought the things that he said to Ashwin were a considerable aspersion on Ashwin's professional profile. He was basically saying, A, he's unpopular among his teammates. B, he's looked after himself in the IPL. C, he's not the kind of guy that we want around here. And D, he's a Indian bully, an Indian bully. And once we get into Brisbane, we'll be able to get the better of him. They're four kind of quite damaging things to say about an opposition cricketer. And I was critical of Tim in a column that I wrote. It actually wasn't a very popular thing for me to say, but I felt as though it needed saying. So that was a slip showed in Tim's record over the last few years. But in general, he's been a very positive influence for Australian cricket. And I suspect that this hiatus that we're now, we're getting 10 months off. We're not playing any Test cricket at all. It's not like he's going to suffer from burnout, is it? And I suspect that he'll come up to next season doubly keen to make sure that his exit to the game, because he's closer to the end than the beginning, leaves as positive a legacy as possible.
Yeah, and in campaign, I quite fondly remember his debut was also against India. And when he'd come into the team, he seemed like, for us at least, he seemed like he was ahead of Brad Haddin, because he had this beautiful technique of collecting the ball. It's quite unfortunate with the finger injuries that he suffered, going on into the rest of his middle part of his career. I think I got something from Anurag. You mentioned Jack Blackham there. So, Jack Blackham actually played in the first ever Test match. It started on the 14th of March 1877. So this, 15th, which is today, would have been the second day of that Test match. So, that's a little bit of a history trivia there for us.
Fantastic. I wasn't there. I'm quite old, but I wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just say we've taken the discussion from 1877 to 2021. That's a nice spread of time for us to cover. But another important amongst coming probably the last question a bit. I know we've taken quite a bit of your time, but again, this is another thing that I think spectators love to discuss. Anything new in the game. It is of course looked at with a lot of scrutiny to see what the positives and the negative fallout from it is. And this is DRS, the use of technology in sport, the use of technology in cricket in particular. We did ask this question to Mr. David Carr when he was on as well, as his perspective as a former batsman. We asked him how much of an impact has it made on the batsman while trying to play spin, and he mentioned the entire rule book has been thrown out of the window now,
Mm,
and it's an
mm.
entirely different manner of batting. Uh, I'd like to ask you from the perspective of a spectator, from the perspective of a fan. Beat any format, DRS is of course the topic of discussion, and umpire's call, which is which honestly is are the two most hated words in cricket right now. Umpire's call. Sometimes it often leaves one of the two parties aggrieved. Do you subscribe to the notion that a lot of ex-cricketers also have, that regardless of how much the ball is hitting the stumps, if it is hitting the stumps, it's out, isn't it? It's like where while you're batting, if you get bowled, whether the ball has
Mhm.
broken the off stump or if it's just taken the little bit of the bail, it's still out, isn't it? So that's the ideology that's thrown around there in terms of impact of the ball on the stumps. Now the impact on the pads when it comes to LBWs being umpire's call and all of that just makes it doubly complicated.
Mm,
So
mm.
what are your opinions on DRS and how it's
It
being
is
implied there?
ridiculously complicated, isn't it? It is absurdly complicated, and only cricket could make such a fiasco of something that used to be so simple. The umpire put his finger up and you walked off. And frankly, that's still the way that I play it. At every other level of the game, that's the way that we still play it. And that's actually one of the things that has worried me about the DRS most of all, is the impact that it has on attitudes to umpires in lower forms of the game. When the DRS is not available, it has licensed dissent. It is common, habitual at lower levels of the game, anything basically first class cricket and below, for players to put on a terrible song and dance if they feel as though they've been dudded. And even if they don't feel as though they've been dudded, there is a kind of a performative response these days to getting out, which is to convey your displeasure. Or alternatively, it's explained as showing your passion. You love batting so much that you hate getting out. Therefore, you have to sacrifice all dignity and all respect for the official by turning on a huge kerfuffle about being given out. And some Australian players are the worst offenders in this, and it sets a shocking example to the rest of the game. So it's not simply the effect of DRS on the cricket in which it is available. It is on its effect on the rest of cricket where it's not available, which is actually the part of cricket that we, as sort of international cricket followers, regard as invisible. But believe me, that is where 99% of cricket takes place. And we very, very seldom think about that at all. So I think players have rather fallen short of their obligations under a DRS system. Administrators have to bear a certain amount of responsibility because they have kind of created a sort of an organized dissent, an institutionalized dissent. They have created a forum where dissent can take place, where it's formalized and bureaucratized and goes up to a man upstairs who ostensibly sorts it all out. I just think that's complete nonsense. I was probably one of the few people who actually agreed with India early on that we shouldn't have DRS at all, frankly. If you can't accept a bad decision every now and again, then you're not much of a cricketer. But these days, I guess we regard cricket as just so important that the skies will fall if our favourite player gets a bad decision. That used to be regarded as a test of character, but maybe no one has a character to test anymore. The other thing is that the other impact that it's had is that at all levels of the game, it's made umpires into much more inclined to give players out, which may actually be not entirely a bad thing. These days, it's been demonstrated, or it appears to have been demonstrated by a DRS, that many, many more balls are hitting the stumps than we used to consider. The umpires would always give not out if the ball gave the slightest hint of doing too much. There was too much of a margin for error to the umpire adjudicating on. You see it at every level now. Umpires are outers. Umpires just give it. And at international level, they rely on the technology to sort it out if they're wrong. But I don't like it when I see decisions like there was one against Kane Williamson in the second innings in the Melbourne Test match here, not last summer, but the summer before, where he was given out the South African umpire. Whose name I've forgotten. Anyway, the ball was hitting just the very, very outside of leg stump. And I did not see how the umpire could have guessed that that ball was hitting the leg stump. Everyone went, "Oh, that's a great decision." Actually, I thought it was a really poor decision because it wasn't a robust decision. It was a fluke that that ball was grazing the outside of the stump. And I felt cheated because I was deprived of the pleasure of watching Kane Williamson, who I really love batting. So that pissed me off at the time. I would. We're never going to be able to get DRS out of the game right now, but I think we have to find a way to use it more realistically. We have to find a way to be more realistic about its capabilities, because we are enthralled to this idea that the technology is never wrong. And I don't know, having watched cricket for so long, there are plenty of times when I think DRS gives a decision that's quite counterintuitive. That the ball is particularly on a pitch with a regular bounce, where the DRS seems to be telling us that the bounce is uniform, that the bounce is consistent, whereas if you're watching the game at all, you realise that some balls are going through the top and some are keeping low. You can't rely on technology to sort that out. It actually requires a level of human judgment if we are but confident enough to allow it to escape.
Absolutely, and I think on in that particular instant, I feel the whole element of discussion within the game, the element of the debate amongst the spectators has been just taken away. We're so focused on, as you put it quite rightly there, we're so focused on trying to be right to the nth degree that we forget that the essence of the sport is probably, once you're done watching for the day, when you're sitting with your friends, when you're sitting with your mates, and just discussing, and you have different opinions. For you, it might be out. For me, it might not be out. And that probably makes up for the whole a lot of couple of hours of discussion. And that used to do that earlier, and we have sort of gradually lost it. And you're right. Even in this series that the recently concluded India versus England series, now because we do not have quarantine for umpires, we often as Indian fans felt the umpires would rather err on the side of England than actually have their integrity questioned by not giving it out. So they were, you said quite rightly, they were massive outers. The appeal went in and the finger came up right instantly along with that, and then everything was left to technology, or then the poor third umpire to get the worst of it. So, but yeah, I think it's almost been an hour, Gideon. I mean, I did not even realize that the time flew by. Thank you so much for joining us. There are still a lot of questions that I could ask you there, because the conversation, the debate has been so fantastic. The discussion has been so fantastic that it's absolutely lost myself in there. Thank you so much for joining in. Any final words from your end, with regards to the cricket that's coming up? Do you just as a little bit of as we call it in India, a little bit of a story? Any IPL team that you might follow, that you might watch at all?
Oh, tough question. I actually quite like Sunrisers because because they're sort of an unfashionable franchise, a battling franchise. I like what Warner's done there. I actually think it's probably going to be the only opportunity he ever gets to captain a side, because of course he's banned for in perpetuity from leadership roles in Australia. He might, people are always talking about how Shane Warne was the best captain Australia ever had. I actually think that Warner might have been a very, very good captain, and it's a shame that he won't have the opportunity here. So because he's kind of an unlikely figure in that setup. The idea that David Warner, the archetypal Aussie, could go to Sunrisers and achieve results there, and blend an interesting dressing room, and take a lot of satisfaction from it, because the interview that we did with him the other day, he just absolutely loves Sunrisers, absolutely loves the squad, loves the owners, loves the franchise. He's very, very loyal to it. I thought, that's a great story. That's a great story about the globalisation of cricket, that David Warner's had the opportunity to discover something about himself that he probably wouldn't have known by any other means. So there. If I had to pick one off the top of my head, I'd say that sunrises. Go sunrises. How about that? There's an exclusive for you. I just made it off the top of my head, spur of the moment.
Absolutely, and I think you've made the sports Doyen team, at least majority of it, very happy because most of our members are based out of Hyderabad.
Oh, is that right?
Massive Sunrisers fans, and I'm sure Anurag will mention that to you, right after this. But and David Warner is as popular in Hyderabad, I guess, as he is in Australia, because him, along with his TikToks on Telugu music, the local language in Hyderabad, and his Instagram reels, the dances that he keeps doing with his wife and his kids. He's just it's regular fodder for us as cricket fans here. So David Warner, I know he's got his own special place in the hearts of Hyderabadi fans at least. So once again, Gideon, and it's been a pleasure. It's been my pleasure and a huge honor for me as well to actually have this opportunity to converse with you. Thank you so much for joining in. Once again, thank you so much on behalf of the Sports Doyen as well for coming on board. We are very, very grateful to have you, and hope you keep enthralling us with your writing, and we do get to talk to you once again in the future somewhere.
I'd be pleased. Thanks very much for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Okay.